Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Catherine, Colleen, Jeanette, Alpha Blossom, Bobby, Betsy, Megan, Glenda, Nita, and Monica and Paul. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes and collections found nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's continue our exploration of the natural wonders of the United States from the time right when they were preserved for the public, with more from Our National Parks by John Muir, first published in 1901. Let's pick up right where we left off in our exploration of Yosemite National Park. Let's begin. The ancient Tuolumne Glacier, lavishly flooded by many a noble affluent from the snow-laden flanks of Mounts Dana, Gibbs, Lyell, McClure, and others nameless as yet, poured its majestic overflowing current 4 or 5 miles wide, directly against the high outstanding mass of Mount Hoffman, which divided and deflected it right and left, just as a river is divided against an island that stands in the middle of its channel. 2 distinct glaciers were thus formed, one of which flowed through the big Tuolumne Canyon and Hetch Hetchy Valley, while the other swept upward 500 feet in a broad current across the divide between the basins of the Tuolumne and Merced into the Tenaya Basin, and thence down through the Tenaya Canyon and Yosemite Valley. The map-like distinctness and freshness of this glacial landscape cannot fail to excite the attention of every observer, no matter how little of its scientific significance he may at first recognize. These bald, glossy, westward-leaning rocks in the open middle ground, with their rounded backs and shoulders toward the glacial fountains of the summit mountains, and their split, angular fronts looking in the opposite direction, every one of them displaying the form of greatest strength with reference to physical structure and glacial action, show the tremendous force with which through unnumbered centuries the ice flood swept over them, and also the direction of the flow, while the mountains, with their sharp summits and abraded sides, indicate the height to which the glacier rose, and the moraines, curving and swaying in beautiful lines, mark the boundaries of the main trunk and its tributaries as they existed toward the close of the glacial winter. None of the commercial highways of the sea or land, marked with buoys and lamps, fences and guideboards, is so unmistakably indicated as are these channels of the vanished Tuolumne glaciers. The action of flowing ice, whether in the form of river-like glaciers or broad mantling folds, is but little understood as compared with that of other sculpturing agents. Rivers work openly where people dwell, and so do the rain, and the sea thundering on all the shores of the world, and the universal ocean of air, though unseen, speaks aloud in 1,000 voices, and explains its modes of working and its power. But glaciers, back in their cold solitudes, work apart from men, exerting their tremendous energies in silence and darkness, coming in vapor from the sea, flying invisible on the wind, descending in snow, changing to ice. White, spirit-like, they brood outspread over the predestined landscapes, working on, unwearied through unmeasured ages, until in the fullness of time the mountains and valleys are brought forth, channels furrowed for the rivers, basins made for meadows and lakes, and soil beds spread for the forests and fields that man and beast may be fed. Then vanishing like clouds, they melt into streams and go singing back home to the sea. To an observer upon this adamantine old monument in the midst of such scenery, getting glimpses of the thoughts of God, the day seems endless, the sun stands still. Much faithless fuss is made over the passage in the Bible, telling of the standing still of the sun for Joshua. Here you may learn that the miracle occurs for every devout mountaineer, for everybody doing anything worth doing, seeing anything worth seeing. One day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as one day, and while yet in the flesh you enjoy immortality. From the monument you will find an easy way down through the woods and along the big Tuolumne meadows to Mount Dana, the summit of which commands a grand telling view of the alpine region. The scenery all the way is inspiring, and you saunter on without knowing that you are climbing. The spacious sunny meadows, through the midst of which the bright river glides, extend with but little interruption 10 miles to the eastward, dark woods rising on either side to the limit of tree growth, and above the woods a picturesque line of gray peaks and spires dotted with snowbanks, while on the axis of the Sierra, Mount Dana and his noble compeers repose in massive sublimity, their vast size and simple flowing contours, contrasting in the most striking manner with the clustering spires and thin pinnacled crests, crisply outlined on the horizon to the north and south of them. Tracing the silky lawns, gradually ascending, gazing at the sublime scenery more and more openly unfolded, noting the avalanche gaps in the upper forests, lingering over beds of blue gentians and purple-flowered bryanthus and cassiope, and dwarf willows an inch high, in close-felted gray carpets, brightened here and there with kalmia, and soft creeping mats of vaccinium sprinkled with pink bells that seem to have been showered down from the sky like hail. Thus beguiled and enchanted, you reach the base of the mountain, wholly unconscious of the miles you have walked, and so on to the summit. for all the way up the long red slate slopes that in the distance seemed barren, you find little garden beds and tufts of dwarf phlox, Evesia, and blue Arctic daisies that go straight to your heart. Blessed fellow mountaineers kept safe and warm by 1,000 miracles. You are now more than 13,000 feet above the sea, and to the north and south you behold a sublime wilderness of mountains in glorious array, their snowy summits towering together in crowded, bewildering abundance, shoulder to shoulder, peak beyond peak. To the east lies the Great Basin, barren-looking and silent, apparently a land of pure desolation, rich only in beautiful light. Mono Lake, 14 miles long, is outspread below you at a depth of nearly 7,000 feet, its shores of volcanic ashes and sand, treeless and sunburned. A group of volcanic cones, with well-formed, unwasted craters, rises to the south of the lake, while up from its eastern shore innumerable mountains, with soft, flowing outlines, extend range beyond range, gray and pale purple and blue, the farthest gradually fading on the flowing horizon. Westward you look down and over the countless moraines, glacier meadows, and grand sea of domes and rock ways of the upper Tuolumne Basin, the Cathedral and Hoffman Mountains, with their wavering lines and zones of forest, the wonderful region to the north of the Tuolumne Canyon, and across the dark belt of silver firs to the pale mountains of the coast. In the icy fountains of the Mount Lyell and Ritter groups of peaks, to the south of Dana, 3 of the most important of the Sierra rivers, the Tuolumne, Merced, and San Joaquin, take their rise, their highest tributaries being within a few miles of one another as they rush forth on their adventurous courses from beneath snowbanks and glaciers. Of the small shrinking glaciers of the Sierra, remnants of the Majestic system that sculpted the range, I have seen 65. About 25 of them are in the park, and 8 are in sight from Mount Dana. The glacier lakes are sprinkled over all the alpine and subalpine regions, gleaming like eyes beneath heavy rock brows. Tree-fringed or bare, embosomed in the woods, or lying in open basins with green and purple meadows around them, but the greater number are in the cool, shadowy hollows of the summit mountains, not far from the glaciers, the highest lying at an elevation of from 11 to nearly 12,000 feet above the sea. The whole number in the Sierra, not counting the smallest, can hardly be less than 1,500, of which about 250 are in the park. From one standpoint, on Red Mountain, I counted 42, most of them within a radius of 10 miles. The glacier meadows, which are spread over the filled-up basins of vanished lakes and form one of the most charming features of the scenery, are still more numerous than the lakes. An observer stationed here in the glacial period would have overlooked a wrinkled mantle of ice as continuous as that which now covers the continent of Greenland, and of all the vast landscape now shining in the sun, he would have seen only the tops of the summit peaks, rising darkly like storm-beaten islands, lifeless and hopeless, above rock-encumbered ice waves. If among the agents that nature has employed in making these mountains, there be one that above all other deserves the name of destroyer, it is the glacier. But we quickly learn that destruction is creation. During the dreary centuries through which the Sierra lay in darkness, crushed beneath the ice folds of the glacial winter, there was a steady, invincible advance toward the warm life and beauty of today. And it is just where the glaciers crushed most destructively that the greatest amount of beauty is made manifest. But as these landscapes have succeeded the pre-glacial landscapes, so they in turn are giving place to others already planned and foreseen. The granite domes and pavements, apparently imperishable, we take as symbols of permanence, while these crumbling peaks, down whose frosty gullies avalanches are ever falling, are symbols of change and decay. Yet all alike, fast or slow, are surely vanishing away. Nature is ever at work, building and pulling down, creating and destroying, keeping everything whirling and flowing, allowing no rest but in rhythmical motion, chasing everything in endless song out of one beautiful form into another. Chapter 4: The Forests of the Yosemite Park. The coniferous forests of the Yosemite Park and of the Sierra in general surpass all others of their kind in America, or indeed in the world, not only in the size and beauty of the trees, but in the number of species assembled together, and the grandeur of the mountains they are growing on. Leaving the workaday lowlands and wandering into the heart of the mountains, we find a new world, and stand beside the majestic pines and firs and sequoias, silent and awe-stricken, as if in the presence of superior beings new arrived from some other star, so calm and bright and godlike they are. Going to the woods is going home, for I suppose we came from the woods originally. But in some of nature's forests the adventurous traveler seems a feeble, unwelcome creature, wild beasts and the weather trying to kill him, the rank, tangled vegetation, armed with spears and stinging needles, barring his way and making life a hard struggle. Here, everything is hospitable and kind, as if planned for your pleasure, ministering to every want of body and soul. Even the storms are friendly and seem to regard you as a brother, their beauty and tremendous fateful earnestness charming alike. But the weather is mostly sunshine, both winter and summer, and the clear sunny brightness of the park is one of its most striking characteristics. Even the heaviest portions of the main forest belt, where the trees are tallest and stand closest, are not in the least gloomy. The sunshine falls in glory through the colossal spires and crowns, each a symbol of health and strength, the noble shafts faithfully upright like the pillars of temples, upholding a roof of infinite leafy interlacing arches and fretted skylights. The more open portions are like spacious parks, carpeted with small shrubs, or only with the fallen needles sprinkled here and there with flowers. In some places, where the ground is level or slopes gently, the trees are assembled in groves, and the flowers and underbrush in trim beds and thickets, as in landscape gardens, or the lovingly planted grounds of homes, or they are drawn up in orderly rows around meadows and lakes, and along the brows of canyons. But in general, the forests are distributed in wide belts in accordance with climate and the comparative strength of each kind in gaining and holding possession of the ground, while anything like monotonous uniformity is prevented by the grandly varied topography and by the arrangement of the best soil beds in intricate patterns like embroidery. For these soil beds are the moraines of ancient glaciers, more or less modified by weathering and stream action. And the trees trace them over the hills and ridges and far up the sides of the mountains, rising with even growth on levels and towering above one another on the long, rich slopes prepared for them by the vanished glaciers. Had the Sierra forests been cheaply accessible, the most valuable of them commercially would ere this have fallen a prey to the lumberman. Thus far the redwood of the coast mountains and the Douglas spruce of Oregon and Washington have been more available for lumber than the pine of the Sierra. It cost less to go 1,000 miles up the coast for timber, where the trees came down to the shores of navigable rivers and bays, than 50 miles up the mountains. Nevertheless, the superior value of the sugar pine for many purposes has tempted capitalists to expend large sums on flumes and railroads to reach the best forests, though perhaps none of these enterprises has paid. Fortunately, the lately established system of parks and reservations has put a stop to any great extension of the business hereabouts in its most destructive forms. And as the Yosemite Park region has escaped the millmen, and the all-devouring hordes of hoofed locusts have been banished, it is still in the main a pure wilderness, unbroken by axe clearings except on the lower margin, where a few settlers have opened spots beside hay meadows for their cabins and gardens. But these are mere dots of cultivation, in no appreciable degree disturbing the grand solitude. 20 or 30 years ago, a good many trees were felled for their seeds. Traces of this destructive method of seed collecting are still visible along the trails, but these, as well as the shingle makers' ruins, are being rapidly overgrown. The gardens and beds of underbrush once devastated by sheep are blooming again in all their wild glory, and the park is a paradise that makes even the loss of Eden seem insignificant. On the way to Yosemite Valley, you get some grand views over the forests of the Merced and Tuolumne basins, and glimpses of some of the finest trees by the roadside without leaving your seat in the stage. But to learn how they live and behave in pure wilderness, to see them in their varying aspects through the seasons and weather, rejoicing in the great storms, in the spiritual mountain light, putting forth their new leaves and flowers when all the streams are in flood and the birds are singing, and sending away their seeds in the thoughtful Indian summer when all the landscape is glowing in deep, calm enthusiasm. For this, you must love them and live with them, as free from schemes and cares and time as the trees themselves. And surely nobody will find anything hard in this. Even the blind must enjoy these woods, drinking their fragrance, listening to the music of the winds in their groves, and fingering their flowers and plumes and cones and richly furrowed boles. The kind of study required is as easy and natural as breathing. Without any great knowledge of botany or woodcraft, in a single season, you may learn the name and something more of nearly every kind of tree in the park. With few exceptions, all the Sierra trees are growing in the park. 9 species of pine, 2 of silver fir, 1 each of Douglas spruce, libocedrus, hemlock, juniper, and sequoia, 16 conifers in all, and about the same number of round-headed trees, oaks, maples, poplars, laurel, alder, dogwood, tumian, etc. The first of the conifers you meet in going up the range from the west is the digger nut pine, Pinus sabiniana, a remarkably open, airy, wide-branched tree, 40 to 60 feet high, with long, sparse, grayish-green foliage and large cones. At a height of 15 to 30 feet from the ground, the trunk usually divides into several main branches, which after bearing away from one another, shoot straight up and form separate heads, as if the axis of the tree had been broken, while the secondary branches divide again and again into rather slender sprays loosely tasseled, with leaves 8 to 12 inches long. The yellow and purple flowers are about an inch long, the staminate in showy clusters. The big, rough, burly cones, 5 to 8 or 10 inches in length and 5 or 6 in diameter, are rich brown in color when ripe, and full of hard-shelled nuts that are greatly prized by Indians and squirrels. This strange-looking pine, enjoying hot sunshine like a palm, is sparsely distributed along the driest part of the Sierra, among small oaks and chaparral, and with its gray mist of foliage, strong trunk and branches, and big cones seen in relief on the glowing sky, forms the most striking feature of the foothill vegetation. Pinus attenuata is a small, slender, arrowy tree with pale green leaves in threes, clustered flowers half an inch long, brownish yellow and crimson, and cones whorled in conspicuous clusters around the branches and also around the trunk. The cones never fall off or open until the tree dies. They are about 4 inches long, exceedingly strong and solid, and varnished with hard resin, forming a waterproof and almost worm and squirrel-proof package in which the seeds are kept fresh and safe during the lifetime of the tree. Sometimes one of the trunk cones is overgrown and embedded in the heartwood like a knot, but nearly all are pushed out and kept on the surface by the pressure of the successive layers of wood against the base. This admirable little tree grows on brushy, sun-beaten slopes, which from their position and the inflammable character of the vegetation are most frequently fire-swept. These grounds it is able to hold against all comers, however big and strong, by saving its seeds until death, when all it has produced are scattered over the bare, cleared ground, and a new generation quickly springs out of the ashes. Thus the curious fact that all the trees of extensive groves and belts are of the same age is accounted for, and their slender habit, for the lavish abundance of seed sown at the same time makes a crowded growth, and the seedlings with an even start rush up in a hurried race for light and life. Only a few of the attenuata and sabiniana pines are within the boundaries of the park, the former on the side of the Merced Canyon, the latter on the walls of the Hetch Hetchy Valley and in the canyon below it. The nut pine, Pinus monophylla, is a small, hardy, contented-looking tree, about 15 or 20 feet high and a foot in diameter. In its youth, the close radiating and aspiring branches form a handsome broad-based pyramid, but when fully grown, it becomes round-topped, knotty and irregular, throwing out crooked, divergent limbs like an apple tree. The leaves are pale grayish-green, about 1.5 inches long, and instead of being divided into clusters, they are single, round, sharp-pointed, and rigid like spikes, amid which in the spring the red flowers glow brightly. The cones are only about 2 inches in length and breadth, but nearly half of their bulk is made up of sweet nuts. This fruitful little pine grows on the dry east side of the park, along the margin of the Mono Sage Plain, and is the commonest tree of the short mountain ranges of the Great Basins. Tens of thousands of acres are covered with it, forming bountiful orchards for Indians. Being so low and accessible, the cones are easily beaten off with poles, and the nuts procured by roasting until the scales open. To the tribes of the desert and sage plains, these seeds are the staff of life. They are eaten either raw or parched, or in the form of mush or cakes after being pounded into meal. The time of nut harvest in the autumn is their merriest time of all the year. An industrious squirrelish family can gather 50 or 60 bushels in a single month before the snow comes, and then their bread for the winter is sure. The white pine, Pinus flexilis, is widely distributed through the Rocky Mountains and the ranges of the Great Basin, where in many places it grows to a good size, and is an important timber tree where none better is to be found. In the park, it is sparsely scattered along the eastern flank of the range from Mono Pass southward, above the nut pine, at an elevation of from 8 to 10,000 feet, dwarfing to a tangled bush near the timber line, but under favorable conditions, attaining a height of 40 or 50 feet, with a diameter of 3 to 5. The long branches show a tendency to sweep out in bold curves, like those of the mountain and sugar pines to which it is closely related. The needles are in clusters of 5, closely packed on the ends of the branchlets. The cones are about 5 inches long, the smaller ones nearly oval, the larger cylindrical. But the most interesting feature of the tree is its bloom, the vivid red pistillate flowers glowing among the leaves like coals of fire. The dwarfed pine or white-barked pine, Pinus albicollis, is sure to interest every observer on account of its curious, low, matted habit and the great height on the snowy mountains at which it bravely grows. It forms the extreme edge of the timber line on both flanks of the summit mountains, if so lowly a tree can be called timber, at an elevation of 10 to 12,000 feet above the level of the sea. Where it is first met on the lower limit of its range, it may be 30 or 40 feet high, but farther up where the snow lies deep and heavy for 6 months of the year, it makes shaggy clumps and beds, crinkled and pressed flat, over which you can easily walk. Nevertheless, in this crushed, down-pressed, felted condition, it clings heartily to life, puts forth fresh leaves every spring on the ends of its tasseled branchlets, blooms bravely in the lashing blasts, with abundance of gay red and purple flowers, matures its seeds in the short summers, and often outlives the favored giants of the sunlands far below. One of the trees that I examined was only about 3 feet high, with a stem 6 inches in diameter at the ground, and branches that spread out horizontally as if they had grown up against a ceiling. Yet it was 426 years old, and one of its supple branchlets, about 1/8 of an inch in diameter inside the bark, was 75 years old, and so tough that I tied it into knots. At the age of this dwarf, many of the sugar and yellow pines and sequoias are 7 feet in diameter and over 200 feet high. In detached clumps never touched by fire, the fallen needles of centuries of growth make fine elastic mattresses for the weary mountaineer, while the tasseled branchlets spread a roof over him, and the dead roots, half resin, usually found in abundance, make capital campfires, unquenchable in thickest storms of rain or snow. The mountain pine, Pinus monticola, is far the largest of the Sierra tree mountaineers. Climbing nearly as high as the dwarf albicaulis, it is still a giant in size, bold and strong, standing erect on the storm-beaten peaks and ridges, tossing its cone-laden branches in the rough winds, living 1,000 years and reaching its greatest size, 90 to 100 feet in height, 6 to 8 in diameter, just where other trees, its companions, are dwarfed, but it is not able to endure burial in snow so long as the albicaulis and flexilis. Therefore, on the upper limit of its range, it is found on slopes which from their steepness or exposure are least snowy. Its soft, graceful beauty in youth, and its leaves, cones, and outsweeping feathery branches constantly remind you of the sugar pine to which it is closely allied, an admirable tree, growing nobler in form and size, the colder and bolder the mountains about it. The giants of the main forest in the favored middle region are the sequoia, sugar pine, yellow pine, libocedrus, Douglas spruce, and the 2 silver firs. The park sequoias are restricted to 2 small groves a few miles apart, on the Tuolumne and Merced Divide, about 17 miles from Yosemite Valley. The Big Oak Flat Road to the valley runs through the Tuolumne Grove, the Coulterville through the Merced. The more famous and better-known Mariposa Grove, belonging to the state, lies near the southwest corner of the park, a few miles above Wawona. The sugar pine, Pinus lambertiana, is first met in the park in open, sunny, flowery woods, at an elevation of about 3,500 feet above the sea, attains full development at a height between 5,000 and 6,000 feet, and vanishes at the level of 8,000 feet. In many places, especially on the northern slopes of the main ridges between the rivers, it forms the bulk of the forest, but mostly it is intimately associated with its noble companions, above which it covers in glorious majesty on every hill, ridge, and plateau, from one extremity of the range to the other, a distance of 500 miles. The largest, noblest, and most beautiful of all the 70 or 80 species of pine trees in the world, and of all the conifers, second only to King Sequoia. A good many are from 200 to 220 feet in height, with a diameter at 4 feet from the ground of 6 to 8 feet, and occasionally a grand patriarch, 700 or 800 years old, is found that is 10 or even 12 feet in diameter and 240 feet high, with a magnificent crown 70 feet wide. David Douglas, who discovered this most beautiful and immensely grand tree in the fall of 1826 in southern Oregon, says that the largest of several that had been blown down, at 3 feet from the ground, was 57 feet 9 inches in circumference, or fully 18 feet in diameter. At 134 feet, 17 feet 5 inches, extreme length 245 feet. Probably for 57, we should read 37 for the base measurement, which would make it correspond with the other dimensions, for none of this species with anything like so great a girth has since been seen. A girth of even 30 feet is uncommon. A fallen specimen that I measured was 9 feet 3 inches in diameter inside the bark at 4 feet from the ground, and 6 feet in diameter at 100 feet from the ground. A comparatively young tree, 330 years old, that had been cut down, measured 7 feet across the stump, was 3 feet 3 inches in diameter at a height of 150 feet and 210 feet in length. The trunk is a round, delicately tapered shaft with finely furrowed purplish-brown bark, usually free of limbs for 100 feet or more. The top is furnished with long and comparatively slender branches, which sweep gracefully downward and outward, feathered with short tasseled branchlets, and divided only at the ends, forming a palm-like crown 50 to 75 feet wide, but without the monotonous uniformity of palm crowns, or of the spires of most conifers. The old trees are as tellingly varied and picturesque as oaks. No two are alike, and we are tempted to stop and admire every one we come to, whether as it stands silent in the calm, balsam-scented sunshine, or waving in accord with enthusiastic storms. The leaves are about 3 or 4 inches long, in clusters of 5, finely tempered, bright, lively green, and radiant. The flowers are but little larger than those of the dwarf pine, and far less showy. The immense cylindrical cones, 15 to 20 or even 24 inches long and 3 in diameter, hang singly or in clusters like ornamental tassels at the ends of the long branches. Green, flushed with purple on the sunward side. Like those of almost all the pines, they ripen in the autumn of the second season from the flower, and the seeds of all that have escaped the Indians, bears, and squirrels take wing and fly to their places. Then the cones become still more effective as ornaments, for by the spreading of the scales, the diameter is nearly doubled, and the color changes to a rich brown. They remain on the tree the following winter and summer. Therefore few fertile trees are ever found without them, nor even after they fall is the beauty work of these grand cones done, for they make a fine show on the flowery, needle-strewn ground. The wood is pale yellow, fine in texture, and deliciously fragrant. The sugar, which gives name to the tree, exudes from the heartwood on wounds made by fire or the axe, and forms irregular, crisp white, candy-like masses. To the taste of most people, it is as good as maple sugar, though it cannot be eaten in large quantities. No traveler, whether a tree lover or not, will ever forget his first walk in a sugar pine forest. The majestic crowns approaching one another make a glorious canopy, through the feathery arches of which the sunbeams pour, silvering the needles and gilding the stately columns and the ground into a scene of enchantment. The yellow pine, Pinus ponderosa, is surpassed in size and nobleness of port only by its kingly companion. Full-grown trees in the main forest where it is associated with the sugar pine are about 175 feet high, with a diameter of 5 to 6 feet, though much larger specimens may easily be found. The largest I ever measured was little over 8 feet in diameter, 4 feet above the ground, and 220 feet high. Where there is plenty of sunshine and other conditions are favorable, it is a massive symmetrical spire, formed of a strong, straight shaft, clad with innumerable branches, which are divided again and again into stout branchlets, laden with bright, shining needles and green or purple cones. Where the growth is at all close, half or more of the trunk is branchless. The species attains its greatest size and most majestic form in open groves, on the deep, well-drained soil of lake basins, at an elevation of about 4,000 feet. There nearly all the old trees are over 200 feet high, and the heavy, leafy, much divided branches sumptuously clothe the trunk almost to the ground. Such trees are easily climbed, and in going up the winding stairs of nutting limbs to the top, you will gain a most telling and memorable idea of the height, the richness and intricacy of the branches, and the marvelous abundance and beauty of the long, shining, elastic foliage. In tranquil weather, you will see the firm, outstanding needles in calm content, shimmering and throwing off keen, minute rays of light like lances of ice. But when heavy winds are blowing, the strong towers bend and wave in the blast, with eager, wide-awake enthusiasm, and every tree in the grove glows and flashes in one mass of white sunfire. Both the yellow and sugar pines grow rapidly on good soil where they are not crowded. At the age of 100 years, they are about 2 feet in diameter and 100 or more high. They are then very handsome, though very unlike the sugar pine, lithe, feathery, closely clad with ascending branches. The yellow, open, showing its axis from the ground to the top, its whorled branches but little divided as yet, spreading and turning up at the ends with magnificent tassels of long, stout, bright needles. the terminal shoot with its leaves being often 3 or 4 feet long and 1.5 feet wide, the most hopeful looking and the handsomest treetop in the woods. But instead of increasing like its companion in wildness and individuality of form with age, it becomes more evenly and compactly spiry. The bark is usually very thick, 4 to 6 inches at the ground, and arranged in large plates. Some of them on the lower part of the trunk, 4 or 5 feet long and 12 to 18 inches wide, forming a strong defense against fire. The leaves are in threes and from 3 inches to 1 foot long. The flowers appear in May. The staminate pink or brown in conspicuous clusters 2 or 3 inches wide. The pistillate crimson, 1/4 of an inch wide, and mostly hidden among the leaves on the tips of the branchlets. The cones vary from about 3 to 10 inches in length, 2 to 5 in width, and grow in sessile outstanding clusters near the ends of the upturned branchlets. Being able to endure fire and hunger and many climates, this grand tree is widely distributed, eastward from the coast across the broad Rocky Mountain ranges to the Black Hills of Dakota, a distance of more than 1,000 miles, and southward from British Columbia, near latitude 51 degrees, to Mexico, about 1,500 miles. South of the Columbia River it meets the sugar pine and accompanies it all the way down along the coast and Cascade Mountains and the Sierra and Southern Ranges to the mountains of the peninsula of Lower California, where they find their southmost homes together. Pinus ponderosa is extremely variable, and much bother it gives botanists who try to catch and confine the unmanageable Proteus in 2 or 12 species, Jeffreyi, Deflexa, Apacheca latifolia, etc. But in all its wanderings, in every form, it manifests noble strength. Clad in thick bark like a warrior in mail, it extends its bright ranks over all the high ranges of the wild side of the continent, flourishes in the drenching fog and rain of the northern coast at the level of the sea, in the snow-laden blasts of the mountains, and the white glaring sunshine of the interior plateaus and plains, on the borders of mirage-haunted deserts, volcanoes and lava beds, waving its bright plumes in hot winds undaunted, blooming every year for centuries, and tossing big, ripe cones among the cinders and ashes of nature's hearths. And with that paean of praise to the ponderosa pine, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Our National Parks by John Muir. I honestly don't know how anyone can't be moved by this beautiful mix of poetry and science. Muir's ability to describe nature is really unrivaled, and I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself and see the photographs it includes, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading, Until our next boring book, good night.